Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last of the four of these webinars that we've been providing you in the last several months. Once again, it's important that I tell you that the role that you play in higher education to ensure that our state has the kind of economy that it needs is really important. You are the fiduciary responsible members for your campuses. And with that in mind, it's been without a doubt, a pleasure to have provided you with the last three of these seminars. But today is last but not least a panel with our representative bodies that we can talk a little bit about the way they see higher ed, not just in the next session, but as a whole. On January 2nd, we had Jamie Marisotis, who's the president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation, talking about the future of higher ed. On November 16th, we had Carol Cartwright on the principles of trusteeship. And on November 30th, we had Bill Whelan, who talked about SAC COC accreditation. You know, the importance of those are clear in the response you've given us. Well, today we'll get a chance to have an esteemed panel, people I get to work with on a regular basis, to give us some viewpoints about how they see your role in higher education. First, let me introduce Representative James Tipton, who represents the 53rd District of Anderson and Spencer counties and serves as chair of the House Education Committee. He is also an ex officio member of the BR Subcommittee on Postsecondary Education and the Primary and Secondary Ed and Workforce Development. Additionally, he has served on the Performance Funding Work Group several times, and including the most recent one, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about. Welcome, Representative Tipton. All right, next is Senator Matthew Deneen, represents the 10th district, in which that is Hardin and County as well as Jefferson County. I'm sure you want to talk a little bit about the battery plant that's going on there and the role post-secondary plays in that. He also serves as the chair of the BR Subcommittee on Education, co-chair of the Lottery Trust Fund Task Force, and co-chair of the BR Subcommittee on Education Assessment and Accountability Review. He is also a former high school educator, and we're glad that we could have you today, Senator Deneen. Glad to have you here. Our last but not least is someone who you probably have heard of over the last many years. I won't represent Senator Neal, how long that's been, but you've been here a minute. Our final panelist today is Minority Floor Leader Senator Gerald Neal. He has served Kentucky since 1989 and represents the 33rd District, which is another part of Jefferson County. He is a member of the Education Committee, A&R Committee, and BR Sub on Education Committee. He also served on the Lottery Trust Fund Task Force, Special Committee, and a variety of other committees. Senator Neal has been a friend of education for a long time, and we are pleased to have you here, Senator Neal. Good to have you. Well, it's important that we just jump straight into this, and I'm just going to let it be a round robin, or you could jump in and answer these questions at will. Most of these questions will go to all of you, so you'll get your chance. But, you know, we're assuming that this coming session will be an active session in more ways than one. It's a budget session, as everybody knows, but there's also a lot of activity that's going around. We know that Kentucky is in a pretty healthy position financially. So we're going to be wondering, how does higher education play into that knowledge? So let me just start out by asking each of you, your thoughts about this session, and what do you think are some of the big things that are going to be happening? And Senator Neal, we'll just start with you since you're right here in front of my face.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate. It's always a pleasure to share some thoughts, in particular with my colleagues, who I learn something from each and every time I talk with them or I listen to them. So I'm really delighted to join this group. I think the 2024, first of all, let me just say, you said the Senate Minority Leader. What that suggests is that I'm not in a position to set exactly what's going to happen during the session. I don't set the agenda. The majority does that. We have processes that are in place that we interact with and engage to get to some common ground, hopefully, and sometimes the ground's not common. And we're still dealing with some issues, and we have to deal with whatever we have to deal with the next day. But I'm thinking that we're going to be thinking in the areas of research, performance funding issues, as well as building preservation and construction. I think a lot of our colleges and universities, that's a critical issue in terms of maintaining particularly the infrastructure that's necessary for our students to have the space to matriculate and for the research to be done. And of course, research is an ongoing piece, and it's evolving, and it's becoming more and more exciting and challenging at the same time going forward. We don't want to be left behind in that. We want to be on the front end of that. And then we got some issues regarding performance funding that has created some unintended consequences. I guess you might call it that. That's left some of our universities in a position where they didn't benefit from that particular process, that particular way of doing business. And the good news is that we don't have to stay where we are. We can learn from our experiences, and then we can adjust accordingly to reach objectives that are attainable.
Thank you, Senator. Let's jump in. Representative Tipton, Chair Tipton, you served on the performance funding work group, obviously, and you are the chair of education of the House. I mean, so I'm sure you have a little bit to say about a lot of these items. So I want to hear to your thoughts on exactly how post-secondary will play in this upcoming session.
Thank you, President Thompson. And first, I just want to thank everyone who's listening in on the webinar today. Each and every one of you who serve as trustees and support services at our universities in different roles are vitally important. I think sometimes we don't say thank you enough. And I certainly appreciate your time and interest in doing that, because we understand that our future depends on a well-trained, qualified group of citizens who can provide the needs and services of the future for themselves and for all of us. So you serve a vital role. And every study that I see indicates that a growing number of jobs of the future are going to require some type of post-secondary education. I look for the 2024 session to be a very busy session, a very active session. Obviously, it is a budget session, so I'll just focus on the post-secondary side there. I know that I have seen the budget requests, the inflationary factors. We've had conversations about those. I also know that we want to continue to continue the maintenance pool. I know there's a lot of deferred maintenance on our campuses. So those discussions are ongoing, and also the continuation of capital projects. I know many of you had capital projects that were approved in the last budget. However, due to inflation, it's going to take more money to complete those projects. I think a lot of we recently, and I'm not trying to point out anybody, but just to point out, I think the recent audit that came out with KCTCS, obviously that is something that we will have conversations about. That system's got a new president coming in, Dr. Ryan Quarles. So I'm very confident Dr. Quarles is going to look into that and work on that. I just want to point out that I know the recent news article about Kentucky State University in a warning on their accreditation. Everybody needs to understand that how that came about. The auditor's report, KSU self-reported many items that happened in 2018 to 2021. Those are not due to recent items. So I'm going to be educating my members this time about that, so they understand that what we did in 2022 of House Bill 250 is moving forward. It's going to take some time to see the results that we want to. I think probably one of the biggest questions around this session is going to be the Senate Joint Resolution 98 report and the recommendations that are made. I know that's public. I'm confident each of you have seen that. I don't know what direction that may take in. but I do foresee that will be given a lot of study. Since Senator Stivers had that resolution, my colleagues in the Senate may have more information on that than I do. But I do believe that that's something that's going to be looked at, because the bottom line is we want to provide an efficient, effective, and quality system of post-secondary education. So we've got a lot of things to look at, but we look forward to your input and ideas as we move forward. So look forward to hearing from Senator Deneen.
Thank you, Chair Tipton. Senator Deneen, it's on you. Before we talk about SJR 98, I'd like to get your thoughts about post-secondary as a whole, and what do you think this coming session will provide, if you will, for us, good and bad, but we would love to hear from you. I think you're on mute, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. I've worked with Dr. Thompson quite a bit during the interim session. He's done a wonderful job on behalf of CPE, and very, very excited about the upcoming session. There will be lots of challenges that we will face related to inflationary issues. We have a lot of ongoing projects on a post-secondary level that, as Representative Tipton led to, will acquire us to do some adjustments in our previous thoughts and funding levels. So that will come into play quite a bit. I am very pleased with the work that CPE has done to continue to evaluate and streamline the oversight and accountability as it relates to ongoing cost of attending post-secondary education. You've done a marvelous job of trying to balance that rising cost over the last few years. So I do want to compliment your efforts there. We have, of course, a great deal of workforce shortage issues across the Commonwealth, and our post-secondary levels really are at the front line of filling those needs and those degrees that are required to move people from a generation of poverty into another level of economic success. And so looking at the degrees that post-secondary is offering and their effectiveness as it relates to the jobs that your graduates are actually holding, and I think is very important to continue those studies and to look at how the new FAFSA form will impact students as they apply for grants and loans, and to make themselves hopefully affordable when they go to college. But we're looking at also adjustments in Pell Grants from the federal level. So there's a lot of different things that can impact the enrollment that some of our institutions are really trying to grapple with right now. But I'm encouraged by the expansion of online offerings and technology. I am excited to look into the roles of research and development funding at that level. So as we go forward, I think there's just a lot of different things to look at, but I am proud to work on behalf of educators. I am the only public educator in the Senate, which makes me kind of an odd duck, I guess you could say. But I'm very glad to carry that mantle forward and to fight for definitely for more teacher education and to get those numbers up. Let's say we really do need to do a much better job of getting out there and marketing and recruiting those students that I know we all compete for.
Thank you, Senator. By the way, I'm going to come back, especially in a minute, with you and Representative Tipton on this P20 conversation. I think it's important for our trustees to understand the importance of that. So I'll come back in a minute, but Senator Neal raised earlier performance funding. That, as you all know, the budget asked, we're asking all the Senate and the House to take a look at, and the governor has some inflationary costs that we believe that we need to have to go to our base in order to do those things that we need to do to stay competitive, like faculty salaries, the wraparound services, and so on, but in addition to performance funding. So, but performance funding was raised earlier by Senator Neal as seeing some inequities in that, if you will, especially for some of our institutions. I'm going to go to you, Chair Tipton, since you sat on that committee. And before I ask you this question, let me give you some latest numbers. It hadn't come out yet, but National Student Clearinghouse will be announcing here really soon that Kentucky is #1 in enrollment gains in the country from COVID. So we're proud of that. We're #2 in completions in the country. We will show you data here fairly soon. We're now 55%, close to 55% toward our 60 by 30 goal. We've made significant improvements, faster than every other state, actually, and I'm bragging a little bit, but also closing gaps, which are important. Now, performance funding has been a big key to that, Representative Tipton, no doubt. And you were a part of this conversation over the last year. Give me your impressions of where you think we're going here, whether or not we're hitting the right spot. And then, Senator Neal, I'm going to come back to you and have you respond to that, if you will. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, President Thompson. I should have talked about that in my opening remarks, but too much to talk about. But I appreciate you getting us back on this important subject. As we look at the metrics that were part of the performance-based funding model, we have seen some successes. I think probably one of the highlights is the number of degrees from underrepresented minorities. We have definitely seen a tremendous increase in that. That metric has worked. However, one area that I've been watching and has concerned me is we have not moved the needle on those students who are economically disadvantaged. So one of the recommendations that came out of the work group was to increase the metric for the economically disadvantaged. So the universities, we want them to focus on these students because Senator Deneen talked about poverty. We have generational poverty in our state in certain areas. And in order for these people to pull themselves out of generational poverty, education is the key. And many times they need those supports. Another thing that we discussed in the work group over the summer is a pool of potential students that I think maybe we have overlooked or neglected, and that is our adult population. We have many adults who have some college but do not have a degree or certificate or credential of any kind. And we also we're recommending to add that as a metric to give some force to that so we can recruit those in the adult population. We also are recommending some changes. We want all our universities to be able to have success from the performance-based funding model, particularly I think Morehead, Kentucky State are two that have really not benefited. So we're looking at some adjustments there. So not drastic, but I think we need to, I think I heard a term we've been having all these election bills. Instead of calling them housekeeping, they decided to call them continuous improvement. And I think that's a good way to look at a performance-based funding model is we need to continually be examining it and making adjustments so that we continuously improve it so that we can meet not only our goals of the state, but also to meet the needs of our students out there and help them succeed in life.
Thank you, sir. Senator Neal, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but also want to ask you, what are some of the things you hope to see, whether it's bills or funding or anything else that goes to the populations that you fairly often talk about? So love to hear a response.
Well, I do understand that I celebrate the gains that we've made. And I agree with much of what Representative Tipton is saying here, quite frankly. And I like him using that word adjustment. Well, two things. One, targeting those that seem not to be impacted sufficiently, making sure that we understand that and make adjustments in that area to reach those populations within these institutions, of course. But the second one's adjustment, again, as it related to, let's say, Morehead and Kentucky State or any institution at any place along the road doesn't benefit from the process, that we not only make some adjustments, but that we ensure that there's adequate funding at any institution to do the work that they need to carry out. We don't need we're not dealing with perfection here. We're dealing with a process here, and we're trying to provide an environment where everybody can benefit. So I'm going to use this word. It's kind of a word that doesn't really explain exactly everything I'm talking about, but we need to establish a sufficient floor that factors in what's necessary for any institution, regardless of where they hit on the scale, can carry out its work in a very competent way. And we have to figure out how to do that, or we need to have some responses or some triggers, so to speak, that can activate certain types of funding sources that where institution doesn't go backwards, but also can access those funds or whatever those leverages might be to maintain a sufficient level of performance. So I think that's going to be very important. It could be very complex undertaking depending upon the challenges of a particular institution. But looking at the populations, going broader than that, looking at the populations that we have, Representative Tipton talks about, I believe I heard him correctly, talking about these populations that have historically had functioned in a challenging environment, addressing them and targeting them. I agree with him totally with respect to that. So I think we're pretty much on the same page on that issue. And I think it's pretty easy for it's hard for someone, difficult for someone to miss the target on what Representative Tipton was saying. So I would have to say we're working toward the same goals and objectives. How that manifests itself, we'll see as we continue along the journey.
Thank you. I want to ask you a follow-up question because KSU has been in the news, and it's important for these folks to understand that's on here. And in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to give directions or thoughts to all of our board members. But let's talk a little bit about KSU, the journey, and where you hope it ends up. I think it's an important elephant in the room to discuss.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And let me just say that we didn't just get here overnight in terms of circumstances. Specifically, we're speaking of Kentucky State University, and it's steeped and tied to its historical development. My assessment suggests that the state has not been consistent in its support financially for the institution. So some of the things that you see or may point to now in the now are really products of a whole historical process that the now has to deal with. And it's not going to be a quick fix in that particular regard. So Kentucky State is one of those situations where I think that we should think in terms of the value of what that institution is and can be, because there are populations of students that not only historically need it. In fact, I matriculated at Kentucky State University, I may point out to you, but I also matriculated at the University of Louisville, and I also matriculated at the University of Michigan. And my point being that each one of those institutions gave me invaluable support. In fact, I often think about the fact that if I hadn't gone to a Kentucky State University, where would I be now with respect to that? The individual who had the benefit of teaching at a post-secondary institution in the adjunct capacity, for instance. So my point is that we should be looking toward how do we strengthen where we have weaknesses? How do we support and project and embrace the future in terms of our capacities and what we need to build them toward, as opposed to how we tear down something. And I don't mean that in a malicious way, but sort of turn our back on something when we have something that serves aspects of our society in a very, and historically has served in a very important way. So I extend, and I got to say, I do much appreciate Representative Tipton, I must say, and my colleague, Senator Deneen, because they move in very measured ways, and they're builders in my view. And I'm not trying to smooge with you guys, but they're builders in my regard. They're thoughtful individuals that are builders, as opposed to looking for the shortcut or the way out, but how do we fix this? How do we get this going toward the future to benefit all? So I'm encouraged, quite frankly, despite the challenges. And I look forward to working with each of these individuals and others toward meeting those challenges.
Thanks, sir. Senator Deneen, you can comment on any of those if you'd like, but I want to take us to another conversation. You and I have had many conversations about the importance of really having a systematic approach to education in Kentucky. I could say Representative Tipton and I have had a lot of those conversations even this week. But the idea that in order to have a strong pipeline to post-secondary education, we're going to have a strong P12 pipeline to make that happen. We have to do what we need to do to ensure that we have that. Now, there are some concerns that these board members and presidents have expressed to me. One being maybe students are not as prepared as they need to be. Another is we have 47.8% of students graduating from high school going to a Kentucky college or university. And we have about 5% more going out of state. And if you look at the numbers, they're a brain drain, right, to other states. So your background in P12 is one that I think brings a uniqueness to this conversation. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, but also please feel free to comment on anything that's been said so far.
Sure. Well, I have been a school administrator on a middle school level, on an elementary level. I've worked as a high school teacher. So I have worked in K through 12 on every level, and I've also ran alternative schools. So I've had a little bit of experience with just about every aspect of K through 12. I am excited about the discussions that we are having to bolster those areas. But looking at the big picture here, we need to make sure that we are providing the high school pathways that lead to further education and lifelong learning. And with that, we have to address the teacher workforce shortage. It is a tremendous problem that we have, and we haven't approached it. We are within it. And we see fewer and fewer people that are going to post-secondary level majoring in education. So we really need to rebuild that infrastructure, I guess you can say, from the foundation up. We need to encourage more people to participate in becoming teachers, whether or not it's elementary, middle school, or high school. And we see right now with the first bill I passed in the last session, Senate Bill 49, dealing with option 6 certifications, we see more and more of our teachers entering into that realm. And they are coming from different areas of different professional fields that they have the degrees that you all are providing from many, many different aspects of the workforce. And in my opinion, that is benefiting our students because they are getting such a wide perspective of some of these new folks that are coming in under option 6 to really fill the gap of some of these areas where we don't see very many applicants anymore, where we used to see maybe 15 or 20 applicants, and sometimes some of these schools in rural areas may only see 1 or 2 applicants. So it is very critical that we expanded that program. I was speaking with some superintendents and principals the other day in Central Kentucky, and they were expressing to me the large number of emergency certifications that they have had to award to fill the gaps. And they were a little, they showed some trepidation on the options and the emergency certifications. And I said this when I spoke with at Midway College yesterday. When I was approached with that, numbers of, 40% of the 50% of these people were emergency certified or option 6 certified, and they were concerned about that. I reiterated the fact that where would you be without them? If you did not have those folks and we did not expand that opportunity, you would be without them. And those students would be without teachers. Now, we can't option our way out of a teacher workforce shortage, no. But what we can do is we can provide the backfill these gaps in the short term in order to better prepare and allow for students to re-enter the educational field on the post-secondary level over the next 4 to 8 years to refill some of those positions. But I am also very interested in working with some of our retired teachers in a way that they can come back and mentor many of these teachers that have not gone through, say, a student teaching program, that are involved in our option sixes positions. They need to come back, and we need to figure out a way to incentivize that so that we can see those experienced teachers come back and help these new teachers that are working so hard to fill the gaps and really keep the boat afloat, if you will, until we see an increase in people enrolling in that field of study. So I'm also encouraged by the work that I've done with the Lottery Fund Task Force. I know you have visited with us there about additional keys money and CAP money, and KTG money. Those grants and opportunities through the funding through the Lottery Fund Task Force and through the lottery funding really address some of our minority and disadvantaged members of our state, that it makes them gives them a little bit more help and reaching that ability to even attend. We see more and more a lot of first gen attendees and for the college level, and we need to encourage that more and incentivize that through our Workforce Ready scholarship programs, our CAP scholarship programs, and our KTG grant programs. So an overall approach, we really need to do a better job of marketing that information through our high school counselors to our high school students to have them better informed, make sure that they fill out the FAFSA form, that we can apply all grants and scholarships available to them to cut back on their costs and reduce their student loan expenditures.
Well, actually, you took the next question I was going to ask you. It was on Lottery Trust Force Task Force. Let me just say, and I'm proud to brag a little bit more, Kentucky got our data back. We've reduced our student loan debt by $4,000 in the state.
Absolutely.
You know, we are going in the right direction. So there's been a lot of effort put by the General Assembly, Governor's Office, and others on using our lottery to really do a better job of getting those out there to the students that may need it. So, matter of fact, 25% of all the money going to post-secondary is coming through the form of financial aid. So, Representative Tipton, let me ask you to jump on a little bit. Lottery Trust Fund, true enough, but talk a little bit about your P20 efforts and your thoughts about the things that you'd like to see. The other item I will throw in, Senator Deneen, I think it's important, is our teacher workforce. And we know that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves a little bit in higher education to help this come along. And we're willing and able to do exactly that with a little help. And we're talking about that little help right now with a variety of folks. What does it look like? But we know this is a crisis now. And so we're going to have to use every source we have to ensure we have the teachers that are there, the right teachers, in the sciences and other areas that are needed, people of color, males, in elementary, all kinds of things we will do to help Kentucky be representative of their students. Representative Tipton, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I appreciate you addressing this. Thanks, Senator Deneen, along with Representative during that task force. That was an effort I've been asking for the last couple of years. I was glad to see it take place because we need to sit back and take a holistic look at all our lottery funded scholarships and grants. Now, we have continued, since I've been in office, we've seen continual growth in lottery funds coming into the state. But one word of caution I want to bring out here is, as we talk about expanding these scholarships and grants, there are only so many lottery dollars.
Correct.
And if we go, some of these expansions would require the possibility of additional general fund dollars. That opens up a different conversation. I also note that we have been told that with the change in the FAFSA, there may be some changes to the eligibility for the Pell Grant, meaning it's very possible there will be many more students who are eligible for Pell. In Kentucky, if someone's eligible for Pell, they're automatically eligible for a CAP or KTG grant. Those are lottery funds. And Kia has told me they're thinking that they actually made an additional budget request, $63 million for general fund dollars just to cover that potential aspect. So we've got a lot of things we have to look at there on the lottery, but I am excited because Kentucky is one of the top states in the nation as far as student aid to our students, and we need to continue that effort. Some of the other areas we mentioned, P20. I forget how many years now, but I've been serving on the Commonwealth Education Continuum. And essentially that is a P20 council with representatives from all aspects of education all the way through. And one thing we have to understand is we have to get away from working in silos. So many times in the past, you had kindergarten or early ed, middle school, college, whatever. But it's all about helping the student succeed. And if the student is going to succeed, they have to have those foundational skills. Senator West, I worked with Senator West in the passage of Senate Bill 9 in 2022, our early literacy bill. We are starting to see some exciting results from that. There are over 4,400 teachers in the state of Kentucky that are now taking the LETTERS professional development program. We have got overwhelming responses of support and encouragement from those. So we're hoping, we have to understand it's going to take time for us to see the results. Along with literacy, I have a very strong passion for numeracy. While we were here in this meeting, I just had a pop-up message from Bill Drafter had just sent me the latest draft of the numeracy bill I'm working on. So as soon as we get off here, you know what I'm doing. I'm going to look at that. But in the numeracy bill we're looking at, we're going to focus on 4th through 8th grade. Why not the earlier grades? Our early education teachers are fully involved in the early literacy right now. We do not want to overload them too much. So we want to focus on 4th to 8th grade, trying to make sure when that student is entering high school, they are prepared for high school math and to go on, because we have so many needs there. So we're working on that. Hope to have that out very early in the session. Look forward to feedback and input from that. And there is a post-secondary component to that. In our teacher preparation programs, had them in the Interim Joint Committee on Education on Monday, talking about their teacher prep programs. So we need to make sure that what our prospective teachers are being taught in our teacher prep programs is in line with what the needs of our K-12 schools are. We need to be working together. It needs to be fluid. So we're continuing to work on that. So that's just one of the pieces of legislation you'll see coming out this time.
Thank you, Representative Tipton. Senator Neal, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. I'll let you jump onto this one as the first question. Anything you want to add with Lottery Trust Fund or anything in your P20 thought process?
I'm glad you didn't hear my first words.
Oh.
Actually, what I want to do is join Representative Tipton when he leaves this webinar, so I can peep into his thought processes with respect to his legislation he's working on. No, I can't add a lot to that at this point. I do think that the giving access and making sure that we can maintain access is critical for our students, particularly those who have lack of access due to the challenges of their financial circumstances and other circumstances related thereto. So anything that we can do in that area is very important. I will point out that, we probably, from a funding standpoint, in an unprecedented position. In fact, it's not probably, we're probably in the best financial position that historically ever, perhaps. I think I might be able to say that. I don't say that from the standpoint that we can go out and do anything, but I think that we can do some of these things and we have the funds to address them. The question is, whether or not how we're going to utilize those funds and whether they're going to have some significant effect on systemically in terms of creating greater access. So as it relates to lottery funds and other sources of funds, we got to be very careful going forward, but we still should drive force forward very aggressively and intentionally in making sure that we maintain that ability to have that access. So that's pretty much my position with respect to that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll go a quick round robin. Then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lee Nimitz, who will be asking questions from the audience. But when you look at the folks who are on this line, which are the fiduciary responsible board members of each of our campuses, you probably have read SJR 98 by now that we turned in. You can throw any of that in there you want to. But I would love to hear from someone who's been in the General Assembly as long as you have. I would love to hear you give them the kind of thoughts that they should be thinking about as we think of post-secondary now and into the future.
Well, actually, I'm kind of I look at things from a fundamental perspective and then build from there. And I think you have, from a trustee standpoint, you have an evolving situation. Some are they're longer than others. And the fact of the matter is that comprehensive training and educational policy, I think, is just essential. I can't assume that that's not taking place. I'm sure it does take place, but I wonder sometimes whether we get stuck at certain ideas and so forth and should not really broaden our thinking as it relates to educational policy and inputting that. I think preparing yourself very highly for financial management, understanding what's happening in the universities and the institutions is very important. It's very easy to get separated from those who you give the responsibility to run these universities with respect to that. And you have trust in them and faith in them. But if you don't ask the right questions, if you don't have the right oversight, and you don't have the right understanding, then you may inadvertently end up compromising the value that you can give in your role. With respect to that, I think that's important. And then I think you got to be on an ongoing basis and look at the specific challenges facing higher education. You can't just get stuck in the higher education bubble, so to speak. You have to see what's happening in K-12 and what's your relationship with that. Looking beyond where you are from an academic institution, but where this becomes functional as it relates to workforce development. At the end of the day, there has to be contribution to society, and there are things that we haven't even dreamed of. I'm waking up every day and I'm looking at my little smartwatch and I'm thinking about Dick Tracy. How did that ever come about? And here we are. My point is that you can't just listen to these words. You really have to engage. You really have to study. You really have to be creative, look forward, sometimes take a chance, but be responsible, of course, in your fiduciary responsibility. So I think understanding what your role is, going deeper in it, being creative in it, reaching outside is very important. Instead of having someone just come to you and say, here's what we got, and here's what we need to do. I think you got to be dynamic in that role and yet respect the fact that you have people that are assigned to deal with what's on the ground each and every day and listen very carefully to what they're saying. I hope that's helpful. But it's very fundamental.
Very much so. Thank you, sir. Representative Tipton, any wisdom to share with this group that's on the line with you? And you can refer to SJR 98 if you will, or if you want to. If not, just what would you offer?
Thank you. This session, there's going to be a lot of proposals made that are going to open opportunities for conversations and discussions. And I just hope that everybody will be open-minded, will listen to each other, and work toward good solutions. Speaking to SJR 98, I think that it is some of the recommendations. It boils down to really 3 points. I think one of them is how much power and authority should CPE have? And I think that's one of the questions that's going to be addressed, and we have to answer that. I think the second aspect of it is we look at our community college system. What is the best way to structure our community college system going forward? What are the ways that we can make it the most efficient and also the most effective? The third part of that conversation with SJR 98 was on the possible expansion of a 4-year university. As the recommendation made, there is more study that needs to be made on that. And I certainly support that. I think it's something we need to look at. We need to examine. We don't want to set up a university that's going to fail. We need to make sure that there are sufficient students, sufficient supports to do that if we move in that direction. So I think those are some of the three key questions that we'll be looking at with SJR 98 at this time. I'm not going to predict what the outcome will be, but I think we will have a spirited conversation about all those aspects.
Look forward to the conversation. Maybe. Senator Deneen, last quick word on this before I turn it over to Lee Nimitz and let her ask you all questions that she needs to ask from the audience.
Well, I do want to reiterate both of my colleagues' comments. We really have to expand some of our research and development areas of funding, I believe, going forward. I am encouraged by some of the interest in technology and broadband funding and what that will mean to further post-secondary education in some of our rural areas. We have a huge gap in rural and urban educational levels, and many of those folks that are going into our universities are many times going into our urban areas and not going back home into those areas because of, well, quite frankly, workforce and economic development. But we have seen a big shift in our state over the recent years, and we are seeing high-paying, high-tech jobs come into our Commonwealth along some of our interstates and some of our transportation networks. So I think there's lots of opportunity to build workforce development programs and work through not only post-secondary with our universities, but also with our KCTCS partners and emphasizing those important pathways that are going to help us encourage our kids to be lifelong learners and continue to attend our universities in support of that. So I am encouraged by all of those opportunities, but I am also very conservative in my expectations of funding. As we go in, I know everybody is excited about our revenues and where we are, but I also want to be very, very prudent in understanding that some of those funds will be, we will need to have those for rainy day funds. And we saw that in the last year with the tornadoes and floodings in different parts of our state. So we do have to safeguard those areas as well that have helped get us to this point. But I do want to say that as we reduce our income tax and we do work in those areas, and then we increase our consumption tax base, I do believe that we will see our state coffers expand as other states have seen. And I'm encouraged by the guardrails and safety measures that we have in place to ensure those things take place. But I think once we see those, as Representative Tipton led to, over the coming years, we have to be patient as we shift in this revenue source and this tax base. But we are seeing a growing population in the Commonwealth. People are moving here, they are relocating here, they are retiring here. And we want to make sure that we continue to offer the great scholarships and the great degrees to allow them to remain here in Kentucky and help our own state grow. So those are some of the things that I do want to keep on the forefront of everybody's minds.
Thank you, sir. Lee, do you have some questions from the audience? I'll let you take it.
We do. Thank you, President Thompson, and good afternoon, everybody. We have 3 audience questions that have come up, and the first, Senator Deneen, relates back to some of the conversations that you raised about the growing teacher crisis. And we have a question about the fact that they mentioned the fact that some of our students are getting offers for internships and co-ops that pay $12 to $20 an hour. Is there any thinking about whether student teachers should have this type of paid option? And how could this impact enrollment in our education degree programs?
Well, thank you for that question. And I believe that plays right into my bill option 6. What we are seeing now, when the bill was first proposed, there was about 1,700 teachers that were involved in the program. Currently, there are over 3,000 teachers involved in the program. Now, I've heard a lot of talk about paying student teachers, but really, if you look at option 6 carefully, it provides that ability, because you're taking someone that may come from a different major or in a different degree program, or someone that maybe only has student teaching to finish out their degree program. And what they may decide to do is to go ahead and go into the job market and become a teacher under option 6, which allows them 5 years to complete the necessary certification classes, whatever they have left over. Maybe it's 6 hours, maybe it's 30, maybe whatever it is, but allows them to basically essentially get paid while they're still taking classes. And that is exactly what your question addresses. I have family members that are involved in the very similar program that have did not student teach, but have full-time teaching jobs now, and they are finishing out that model and that educational degree. So I see those things happening, but I am also in support of ways that we can encourage others to enter the education profession. And maybe there are opportunities for students to be involved, high school students to be involved in apprenticeship programs, co-op programs, and to start that pathway early on in high school. So I'm encouraged by all those.
Thank you, Senator Deneen. I don't know if anybody else wants to address this issue of incentives to encourage students to go into teaching, whether it be paid student teaching opportunities or some of the other ideas on the table, before we move on to the next question.
Lee, I might comment on that. I actually had legislation drafted for last year that would provide a stipend for student teachers. As I was reminded, we were not in a budget session. That was going to cost some money, so that kind of got put on the shelf last session, but that is something that is being seriously discussed this time. Possibility of offering stipends for student teachers. I don't know if that will make the final cut or how it would be shaped, but that is in the conversation.
Thank you.
I don't want to be left out of that. I want to pile on and say, yes, I agree with both of these efforts. So we need to incentivize that process to grow teachers. And there's a special group of people who go into this profession, and we need more of them. And we need to make it a welcoming home and welcome lifelong endeavor for them. So yes, anything that we can do to incentivize and assist those who want to go in that direction, or maybe even those who have not thought about that necessarily, but say, hey, this is a good choice in life, and really begin to discover what that means to their life and ultimately to the Commonwealth. So yes, I agree with these comments, and we should do all that we can in that regard.
Well, thank you. So the next question is open to anybody who wants to respond to it. We had a attendee ask, in so much as underrepresented minority enrollment and degree attainment is up across the Commonwealth, how do we reconcile this with conversations about the effectiveness of DEI offices and officers? So I just want to put that out there if anybody wants to respond to that.
Lee, I'll jump into there. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I think one of the things we actually define what we mean when we say those terms, because I think there are many people in the world, there are many people in the legislature that define those terms in different manners. I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, the University of Arkansas did away with all their DEI programs, all their funding for DEI, and they put all that into student success. I think what we have to remember, our goal is we want every student to succeed. Yes, there are certain student populations who have some disadvantages. They may be a first-generation college student. They may come from a completely disadvantaged family. So we need to have supports there to help them. I don't know how this conversation is going to wind up in the session, but I have had many conversations with members who have asked about this issue. So I anticipate there will be legislation in regard to this. I have not seen any of that yet, but I anticipate we will have a spirited conversation about that issue during 24 session.
Thank you, Representative Tipton. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I regret the perspective that we cannot look at our past, embrace our past, recognize our past, include those who have systematically and even to this day suffer from the legacy of our past, particularly as it relates to race, but also class and also gender, who put themselves into what I would consider a reactionary pose, as opposed to embracing knowledge, building upon it, and planning for not only now, but a better future. So I listened to all this discussion, but quite frankly, all of my life, it's always been a battle for that part of that discussion. That discussion has been suppressed historically for a number of reasons. It's rejected by many, and some are totally ignorant because it is not dealt with in a systematic way, an academic way, and a practical way in our institutions. I didn't hear much of what Representative Tipton said because the microphone was interfering with his commentary. But, and I don't know what position he has on that. I don't understand why this should be such a spirited, that part I picked up, debate or discussion. We should always fight to include, we should never be afraid to investigate, analyze, and understand our past. And we should embrace each other as human beings in a society where we are truly together, where we are truly giving access to society so all can uplift, integrate with each other in a way where, as a society, we win. We win. We all win. And when I hear all this discussion and all this stuff going across the table and things that's been let loose, I look at it and I said, wow, that is, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking, but it's not consistent what I think of in an open society, that neighbors embrace each other. They're breaking themselves away from what is the obvious negativity that's associated with various populations of the past, and the need to recognize that, not only understand it, but celebrate what we have going forward in the future. I invite my colleagues, I invite those who are listening in to reflect upon that. This is not an attack where some people perceive it. This is an opportunity for all of us.
Thank you, Senator Neal. We're actually hitting the end of our hour, and I don't know, President Thompson, if we have an opportunity for a couple more minutes. If Representative,
let's take the opportunity to ask one more question, Lee, if we could.
Sure. Well, the last question that we got really goes back to the performance funding model discussion that occurred earlier in the session. And we had a question about, I think some concerns about some of the campuses that may have not benefited to date from the performance funding model in the way that I think that had been hoped. So the question is really, what are the specific measures to ensure equity among Kentucky post-secondary ed institutions? And I think President Thompson might be worth mentioning the small school adjustment and some of the other efforts to, ensure that all campuses benefit to some level.
Yes, let me just jump in and answer that. And if the General Assembly codifies what this performance funding new model would look like, what it would do is it would give a real small school adjustment to those small schools like Moorhead, KSU, where they get the starting place in the same place as everybody else to be able to earn some dollars with their performance. So that's the one big thing I think that will help in that area. The other item too is Representative Tipton mentioned, I think it's important for us to say that we saw great improvements in our underrepresented populations because we had a kicker that allowed that to happen, but we didn't see as big of a movement in low income. We did see a movement, it was positive, but not as large. So we've increased that from 3% to 8%. And obviously the other factor is importantly to get there at 60 by 30 or adult learners. Those are the major elements that we will be asking for a change in, and all does not significantly modify the model, but what it does is it creates a continuous improvement based on the way we've looked at it the last two reviews.
Thank you, President Thompson, and that's the end of the audience questions, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, audience, I want to thank our panelists. I get a chance to work with these folks every day. The one item that I can tell you that each one of these good gentlemen focus on exactly what's good for Kentucky. And we've had a lot of conversations from higher ed with them, without a doubt. Our argument is the most direct correlation between a healthy economy is a highly educated workforce, and the most direct correlation to a highly educated workforce is a well-funded, strong higher ed system. And that's an important item that I'll ask everybody to remember as we go into this. Your roles that you serve, board members, is to ensure that that continues. We've had a lot of success, but we have a long way to go. Our workforce participation rate isn't where we want it. And we are going to be spending a lot more time talking about mission for each of your institutions, how you can serve your regions, how you can serve the populations that you purport to serve, how we can really focus on student success for everybody, because we need to get them all in the workforce. I want to thank you for your continued efforts and your volunteerism, if you will, toward that effort. The last item I will say is we wish each of you, including the panelists and you, a happy holiday. We hope that you enjoy it, be safe, enjoy your families, and we look forward to coming back in 24 and spending more time with you. Thank you all for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.